Chapter 6. Liberty, the breath of God. A prophet does not have to believe in God to speak the words of truth. Steven Pinker, an avowed atheist, finds it necessary to borrow the vocabulary of the faithful to explain the phenomenon of human speech and language. Language comes so naturally to us that we're apt to forget what a strange and miraculous gift it is. But think about what you're doing for the next hour. You're going to be listening patiently as a guy makes noises as he exhales. Now, why would you do something like that? It's not that I can claim that the sounds I'm going to make are particularly mellifluous, but rather I've coded information into the exact sequences of hisses and hums and squeaks and pops that I'll be making. You have the ability to recover the information from that stream of noises, allowing us to share ideas. Now, the ideas we are going to share about this talent, language, but with a slightly different sequence of hisses and squeaks, I could cause you to be thinking thoughts about a vast array of topics. Anything from the latest developments in your favorite reality show to theories of the origin of the universe. This is what I think of as the miracle of language, its vast expressive power, and its phenomenon. It's a phenomenon that still fills me with wonder, even after having studied language for 35 years. That's from a Steven Pinker video that is linked below. Pinker calls language a miracle because he views the mechanical functions that cause it to work utterly mundane, and he's not really wrong. As he says, we are just listening patiently as a guy makes noises as he exhales. That sentence could just as easily describe a doctor examining a patient with a stethoscope, a teacher trying to decode a student's account of a playground mishap, or American citizens listening to the president deliver the State of the Union. Later on in the same speech, he gives a more thorough and detailed explanation of the mechanical process that produces speech and delivers it from the speaker to the listener. Each of us has at the top of our windpipe, or trachea, a complex structure called the larynx, or voice box. It's behind your Adam's apple. And the air coming out of your lungs have to go past two cartilaginous flaps that vibrate and produce a rich, buzzy sound source full of harmonics. Before that vibrating sound gets out to the world, it has to pass through a gauntlet or chambers of the vocal tract. The throat behind the tongue, the cavity above the tongue, the cavity formed by the lips, and when you block off airflow through the mouth, it can come out through the nose. Now, each one of those cavities has a shape that, thanks to the laws of physics, will amplify some of the harmonics in that buzzy sound source and suppress others. We can change the shape of those cavities when we move our tongue around. When we move our tongue forward and backward, we change the shape of the cavity behind the tongue, change the frequencies that are amplified or suppressed, and the listener hears them as two different vowels. Likewise, when we raise or lower the tongue, we change the shape of the resident cavity above the tongue. Once again, the change in the mixture of harmonics is perceived as a change in the nature of the vowel. When we stop the flow of air and then release it, then we hear a consonant rather than a vowel, or even when we restrict the flow of air, as in f or s, producing a chaotic, noisy sound. Each one of those sounds that gets sculpted by different articulators is perceived by the brain as a qualitatively different vowel or consonant. Speech is fundamentally the product of two things. One is breath, and the other is the physical space of the vocal tract. Our breath, the expulsion of air from our lungs, carries enough force on its own to extinguish candles or clear away the sawdust from a freshly cut board. Yet, when the force of our lungs is compressed through the narrow opening of a straw, it can propel spitballs clear across a room, or deliver a dart with enough velocity to kill a small amphibian. The difference in power comes from the shape of the arena it passes through. When a large volume of air is compressed into a small enough space, it can exert a tremendous amount of pressure, That force is what drives the majority of nails into boards that hold our modern homes together. We refer to the tools capable of harnessing this power as pneumatic tools, a Greek term for breath that is also translated as spirit. It is exactly this word that is used by Paul in our verse about liberty. Now the Lord is the pneuma, and where the pneuma of the Lord is, there is liberty. The same dual usage of breath and spirit is found in the Hebrew word ruach, where the spirit, ruach, of God moved upon the face of the waters, and every creature that has the breath, ruach, of life in it, and also God made a wind, ruach, to blow over the earth, and the water subsided. The form of the pneuma, or ruach, is changed and shaped by the context, the arena in which it moves and lives. It is useful in English that we have two different words for breath and spirit, but they are far more connected than we realize. When a person stops breathing, their spirit soon departs. When a person's lungs fill with water, there is no more room for the spirit. The water must be expelled before the breath can return, in which case, sometimes a person deemed clinically dead can be revived by forcing breath into their lungs. Consider again the mechanical terms in which Pinker seeks to describe the miracle of speech, but with their alternate forms. And the spirit coming out of your lungs, arena, has to go past two flaps, like a tent, an arena, that vibrate, agentic action, and produce a rich, buzzy sound source, full of harmonics, tones that share the same pattern, or telos, as the primary tone, at different levels of frequency. Before the agentic spirit gets out to the world, arena, it has to pass through a gauntlet or chambers, arenas, of the vocal tract. What is the result of this action? Speech and language, information and instruction, something that can bring order and intelligibility to the chaotic world in which we live. Pinker has unwittingly given us a greater vocabulary to understand not only the way we speak, but the way in which God speaks, as his spirit moves through his creation. By understanding the primary symbolic categories of being agentic or arenic, and the qualities that map onto them, masculine and feminine, dark and light, form and context, nature and nurture, we can discern the shape of our environment and the different spirits that have come to inhabit the world in which we live. Liber versus Libertas. In examining the differences between the French and American revolutions, it is important to note that much of the language and imagery used was very similar, yet the outcomes were drastically different. That alone is an important thing to notice. Appearances can be deceiving. One consistent element between the two was the elevation of liberty as a principal value. In both cases, liberty was portrayed as a woman, but there was a very different quality between the two goddesses. The American Lady Liberty, especially as portrayed on silver coins, bears the same imagery of the Roman goddess. She wears the Phrygian cap of a slave and holds the rod of vindication, which frees the slaves. It is usually depicted on U.S. coins as a branch with leaves, perhaps pointing to the budding staff of Aaron or the olive branch of peace from the story of the flood. In contrast, the Liberty of France was not Liberty, but the costumed goddess of reason, who impersonated Liberty and was dressed provocatively. In my estimation, the French Revolution did not embrace the spirit of the goddess Libertas, but the god Liber. Liber was the free one, also known as Liber Pater, the free father, was a god of wine, male fertility, and freedom. His cult and functions were increasingly associated with the Romanized forms of the Greek Dionysius or Bacchus, whose mythology he came to share. The same contrast between Liber and Libertas was seen in the Greek, where Eleutheria was contrasted with Dionysius Eleutherius, the liberator, whose wine, music, and ecstatic dance liberated his followers from self-conscious fear and worry, challenging the oppressive restraints of the powerful. In both traditions, the male gods were widely known and celebrated, while their female counterparts were only discernible from their theoretical position in the pantheon of the gods. They emerged only when the arena, environment, context was ready for their arrival. Why is there such a difference between a god and goddess who ostensibly represent the same values? The difference is discovered in the corresponding characteristics that accompany the nature of male and females. In France, the inventors of the new cult of reason explicitly tried to separate the concept of liberty, truth, and reason from their personified deities. But these virtues are not neutral, as in neuter, sexless. They manifest differently according to their form and context. The male Liber is the embodiment of agentic liberty, the freedom to act. His actions cannot be curtailed by the presence or consequences of others. The spirit of liberty of action is do what thou wilt. It is the spirit that values the freedom of the will above all other virtues and has no restraint. When society fully embraces the masculine virtue of liberty, the inevitable outcome is that those with more agentic power become the most free at the expense of the powerless. Those who possess great physical strength, wealth, or charisma are free to do as they please. On the other side, those who lack power and agency become non-persons. They are relinquished to the role of animals, part of the environment, the context against which the free agent exercises his liberty. The intellectual heroes of the Enlightenment and the French Revolution all sought to break down the barriers of culture and society. Voltaire, Robespierre, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the Marquis de Sade, and others all chafed under what they saw as the restrictive spirit of Christianity and civilization. The liberal spirit of the agentic will seeks to violate the sovereignty of the weak within its own sphere, justifying rape, such as Sade did, or it tears down to boundaries that define the environment, such as Rousseau, whose concept of the social contract was designed to erode the fabric of society. What then is the other side of this? How does Libertas, the personification of the feminine and arenic qualities of liberty, oppose the power of Liber? It cannot do it by itself, or if it can only do so on such a high level that it's difficult to perceive. Another characteristic of the male-female distinction is that of order and chaos. A simple dichotomy would be to say that order is masculine while chaos is feminine. That is not quite correct. The arenic quality of masculinity is ordered, but its agentic action is chaotic or destructive. The arenic quality of the feminine is chaotic wildness, while its actions are generative and creative, birthing and nurturing life. Bringing order to creation requires agency, power, and destruction. It is death, killing, and division. However, each division of the chaotic wilderness can bring forth new forms of life. The feminine quality of liberty is in abstraction is difficult to understand because it looks like complete passivity. Consider the free man, an explorer and developer of the wild frontier. All of nature yields to his demands. With enough technological resources, he can make crooked paths straight, leveling the mountains and filling in the valleys. So long as he is mindful of its wildness, nature does not rise up to destroy him. This is the nightmare of the environmentalist, who fears the devastation of forests, the strip mining of mountain ranges, and the toxic pollution of the waterways. Yet what the free man accomplishes by these works are all the marvels of the modern world, such as the metropolitan skylines of Dubai and Singapore. Of course, many would hold the opinion that these technologically advanced cities are too ordered. They lack the pleasing qualities of nature. This results in an excessively ordered construction of the city and a thoroughly ordered destruction of nature to harvest its resources. What is the opposite excess? One is the wildness of the jungle, a place where change is imperceptible. Life grows and grows, swallowing up cities and cultures. Human civilization only exists in tiny pockets of loosely ordered tribes, such as those seen in the Amazon. If the first scenario valued the freedom of the individual over the preservation of the environment, the jungle represents the liberty of the environment over the freedom of the individual. Another is complete cultural stagnation. Though it was not led by women, the Edo period of Japan was characterized by an overly conservative culture of Bushido, which valued preservation of the group over the rights and liberties of the individual. Thus, it demonized the masculine quality of destructive creativity and risk-taking. It was created to make the group strong, giving Japan as a whole liberty in the arena of the nations, making Japan free to do as it wished, uncoerced by the choices of other nations. But the individuals in the nation had very restricted roles and no freedom even to move about the country. This led to a rise in bureaucracy and stifling of innovation and economic growth. Though the masculine men, such as the samurai, were able to perform acts of violence, they could only do so according to their assigned role in society. They had no room to disagree or rebel, and the mechanism that enforced good behavior was based on the feminine quality of shame. There was no need to enforce behavior, as the shame of being shunned by your community was enough for people to punish themselves, often resulting in suicide. Lady Liberty, mother of the free. However, the fullest expression of the feminine arena quality of liberty is found at its borders. Liberty is passive and tolerant towards the free man within its borders. Like a mother, she is lenient with her children, but fiercely protective of them from those who reside outside the borders of her influence. As the most famous lines of Emma Lazarus' poem state, liberty calls out to gather in those who cannot protect themselves. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless tempest tossed to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. Liberty's pleas bear striking resemblance to the words of Jesus when he lamented the foolish rebellion of the children of Israel. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often would I have gathered your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. Jesus projects onto himself the feminine role of a mother hen. This is not emasculating, but a fuller expression of what it means to be human, made in the image of God. Just as a resourceful woman can take up arms in a time of need, the Son of Mary takes on the role of liberty to protect the weak. This motherly aspect can be observed quite literally in the story of Rebecca and her twin sons. As the two boys each exhibit the masculine and agentic spirit of Liber, they cannot reside for long within the same arena. The two boys will eventually grow to encompass their own nations, Israel and Edom. The babies jostled each other within her, and she said, "Why is this happening to me?" So she went to inquire of the Lord. The Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb, and two people from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger." While the two boys are small enough to reside within their mother's womb, she absorbs the chaotic energy of their blows. Feminine liberty tolerates and protects the masculine freedom as long as she is not overpowered. This quality extends after birth to the household. Young children, though they are weak, are very aggressive. The parents absorb the damage inflicted by their blows and respond with the appropriate discipline, tempered by kindness and gentleness. Over time, this transforms the wild and indulgent nature of the child. While the Greeks and Romans had little need for myths about the Lady Liberty, our conception of her is best understood as an image of Christ's bride. We can imagine the feminine liberty as the better Eve, connected to her husband. The two act as one, back to back, as one comforts the children inside the circle of her protection. The other remains vigilant in defending the borders of the garden from the serpents outside its gates. How then does the feminine quality of liberty emerge inside a culture? It comes about when men and women partner together, using their liberty of will to serve the interests of those who are weaker than themselves, both in nurture and protection. In his letter to the Galatian church, Paul contrasts the condition of those who have not yet received liberation through the Spirit of God with the newfound liberty of freed slaves. Formerly, when you did not know God, you were enslaved to those that by nature are not God's. But now that you have come to know God, or rather to be known by God, how can you turn back again to the weak and worthless elementary principles of the world, whose slaves you want to be once more? For you were called to freedom, brothers, only do not use your freedom as an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. For the whole law is fulfilled in one word: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. But if you bite and devour one another, watch out that you are not consumed by one another. If the French rebels had taken even 1 minute to consider the wisdom of these statements, they would have realized the foolishness of setting the liberty of man's action at the highest place of value. As soon as men indulge, they find themselves not free, but enslaved by passions. The promise of the Scripture is that the Spirit of God, which liberates men, will also reside within them, and as a seed planted in good soil, will bear fruit in them, consisting of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. These are the tools that enable a world to be cultivated for the arrival of liberty. Uncovering the hidden. The ultimate image of the emergence of liberty is through the life, death, and resurrection of Christ. Christ is the image of the invisible God, the incarnation of God himself within creation. No man has greater agentic power or freedom than Christ. His ability to create, to heal, and to resurrect the dead evidences his power and ability. Many expected him to rise up in opposition to Rome, yet instead he allowed himself to be killed. If Christ performed the miracles attributed to him in the Gospels, there was no way that the Romans could have hurt or killed him unless he willingly subjected himself to torture and death. Christ, who is referred to as the last Adam, suffered a death on the cross that is symbolically linked to the first Adam. In the account of Adam's creation and placement in the garden, there is ultimately found no suitable helper for the man. God places him under a deep sleep, symbolic of death, and removes a piece of his side, filling in the hole with flesh. From this side, possibly a rib or the outer curve of the pelvis, God builds Eve, constructing her like a building, an arena, out of the stuff cut from Adam. Adam awakens to a new heaven and a new earth, as the world now contains the woman, who is his bride. Likewise, Christ suffers a real death, and his side is pierced, out of which emerges blood and water. This is the stuff which symbolizes the construction of a new kingdom, Arenic, which is his bride, feminine, the church. While it's not the explicit message of the Bible, it's useful to conceive of Libertas, or Eleutheria, as a personification of the bride of Christ. Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. But the inverse is also true. Where true liberty exists, the Spirit of the Lord can reside. In this metaphor, we have an excellent example of the telos, which unites every level of society, from the individual up to the level of the cosmos. The delicate nature of this liberty is a reflection of its feminine qualities. The story of God building Eve out of the sacrifice of Adam's side has some curious connections to our understanding of human biology. No biblical scholars are likely to endorse this interpretation, but to longtime readers of science fiction, it makes quite a bit of sense. The story is miraculous in the fact that it goes against our natural observations, But as we have discovered more about the physical and biological realities of the world, it actually becomes more plausible. Look closely at the text from Genesis 1:27. The first part corresponds to the beginning of the expanded story in chapter 2. So God created man in his image. In the image of God, he created him. God creates a singular man, Adam, a male human who bears the image and likeness of God. Paul later speaks of Christ as the final Adam, God incarnate. So both Adam and Jesus are human and male. Adam has no earthly mother. He is formed from the dust of the earth, but he is called God's son, so he has a father but no mother. Yet just like Jesus, his male sex is determined by the mixed sex chromosomes X and Y. In Adam, the presence of a Y chromosome makes him male. The origin of an X chromosome is hidden. There is no mother from which to receive it. Much like brown eyes, the male sex chromosome is dominant. It masks the expression of the female sex. Yet the female sex chromosome is always present. In Christ, the X chromosome comes from his mother, Mary. But being conceived from a virgin, the nature of his Y chromosome is hidden. Its origins are both miraculous and mysterious. The next part of the verse corresponds with the latter half of the story in chapter 2. Male and female, he created them. We now have the distinction of male and female, and the plural them in view. This is the state of things after Eve has been created. The story of Eve's creation speaks of God removing the side of Adam as he builds Banah, the woman, from it. This is in contrast to Adam's creation, who is formed, Yatzan, where the amount of stuff needed to make a man is rearranged into the correct form. God takes a seed of Adam's body and adds to it. The word is the same one for building a temple. What seed would God require of Adam? The male has one X chromosome, which God adds back in again, doubling it, multiplying it, as cells divide and multiply in the normal development of a human embryo. A male carries his mother's X chromosome as a hidden recessive gene. Much like the gene for blue eyes, it can be passed down by someone who does not display its expression outwardly. Thus, the woman emerges from the same stuff that formed the man. She was present all along, but hidden until the circumstances were right for her emergence. In the intervening verses between the formation of the man and the woman, Adam is shown his purpose of keeping and tending the garden, and he has brought the animals to name. God gives him these tasks to complete so that Adam will know the difference between not good, his state of being alone, and very good, the world in which he encounters his bride. God only brings forth the woman after Adam has searched every corner and named every creature of the newly planted garden. This moment is the final glimpse of the ultimate telos of creation in its unblemished form. It is a blueprint of the final reconciliation between heaven and earth portrayed in the last chapters of Revelation. What happens next is a long history of the woman's doubt and the man's rebellion against the promises of God. This sets the pattern for the rest of the story from Adam to Christ. As humanity in general continues on a path of rebellion, we are told the particular story of God's continuous intervention with Israel, as she, the nation, seeks to follow the rest of mankind by exploring every corner of the world and every possible mistake before turning back to God. The revelation of Christ as the second Adam is the beginning of the reversal of this trend. Rebuilding a home for a bride. Starting from the dawning of the church age, we can see how this concept truly worked itself out in history. As Paul and the other apostles traveled around and preached the good news, a tangible change occurred in the fabric of society. This message was more than just an opiate for the masses. The concept of a paradise after death was already present in the culture, but the gospel promised both an eternal hope and a change in the here and now. Though the message traveled rapidly among the slaves, there were also many wealthy citizens who became followers of Christ. Though it took a few centuries, eventually the message of the gospel reached total vertical integration as the Emperor of Rome, Constantine, became a follower of Christ. The vertical integration meant that the telos of the gospel was present, to some degree, at every strata of civilization, but it was not horizontally accepted. Each level of society was, to a certain extent, a house divided. But within those levels, there were pockets where the community was captive to the Spirit of God, and in those places, liberty was found. In each place, this property of liberty was an emergent phenomenon. It could occur spontaneously in the hearts of individuals, but it required a consensus adoption to fill the higher circles of the community. A majority of believers in a family would create a household of liberty. The crucial step would occur when larger assemblies of believers could congregate. This was done in secret as believers met in homes or hidden places like catacombs when the church was under persecution, or publicly where the local government was amenable. A local congregation of believers would create a second level space of liberty, a refuge of freedom where the hierarchy of the outward culture was subject to the laws of liberty. This meant that within those meetings, a slave could teach his master, a woman could minister to men, and a Jew could learn from a Gentile. Each person recognized the Spirit of God within their fellow brothers and sisters, co-heirs of the inheritance of God, a place in his eternal kingdom. In most times and most places, the forces opposed to the Spirit of God have been able to keep the influence of the church to these lower realms, the individual, the family, and the local assembly. When a consensus has broken through to the higher levels, towns, cities, provinces, and nations have been transformed. A majority conversion is not necessary and can be problematic if it is not genuine, but what is required is an adoption of the values promoted by the Spirit, mainly liberty. If the pagan majority, or a plurality of minorities, recognizes that they benefit from protecting the rights of Christians to worship freely, because their rights are also protected, then there is room for liberty to grow. The Christian emphasis on spreading the gospel message is an incredibly powerful tool for cultural transformation because it causes the most radical change within the individual, and it quickly emanates upward through the influence of transformed individuals into ever-widening cultural arenas. The danger of this emphasis is that it is on the individual level that the telos of the gospel can be most easily misinterpreted. The spirit of Libertas can rapidly devolve into the spirit of Liber, even if it is not accompanied with the wine and dance. The freedom to act comes with the same freedom to abstain. This is what true liberty provides. When the emphasis shifts to rights, actions must be practiced and defended. When my rights impede the flourishing of others, true liberty vanishes. This was the era of segregation, where whites insisted on the right to operate in the absence of blacks. The arbitrary insistence on race-based segregation kept true liberty from flourishing. But the corrective measures of the civil rights movement have been co-opted towards tyranny in the sexual revolution. We can also feel this shift in the way that sexual minorities turned a plea for equal treatment into insistence on widespread acceptance and celebration. For the sake of so-called rights, the freedom of speech and free expression of religion have come under attack. It was the church's mistaken belief that liberty meant the free will of the individual that caused them to ignore these gradual encroachments on the true liberty their antecedents worked so hard to cultivate. This has greatly reduced the ease through which the message of true liberty can spread. The words of truth shared by Christians are held by most to be private beliefs, safely ignored as true for you, but not for me, unless they are sharp enough to be considered bigotry. As things now stand, the influence of the church and the gospel are locked into the lowest spheres of cultural influence, and their reach is rapidly shrinking. Many believe the problem with the West is its loss of religion. Reality is that the West hasn't lost its religion entirely. Rather, it has replaced the Christian faith, centered on Christ's death and resurrection, with the ethos of Dionysus. The West has adopted the pattern of the old pagan gods, which we are not familiar with. Consequently, we fail to recognize the spiritual pattern before us, often dismissing it as mere secularism. However, there is another pattern of cultural transformation that is clearly outlined in the Bible, which has been severely neglected in the past several decades. It is a more difficult path, but it is the only one suitable for people seeking true liberty in an increasingly hostile world.